Welcome everyone to the Lo-Fi Poli-Sci Podcast. I'm your host Michael Pickering, and that's right, Lo-Fi is in low fidelity, low quality, in your face, messy as can be global news show. Here we're going to talk about that famous question, what's going on in the world today? We'll be covering 5 headlines from across the globe and then choose one to go into a more detailed analysis. The news, fresh off the press. Source, Reuters World Section. Russia tells Czechs to hand over dismantled statue of Soviet commander. That's right, Lo-Fi Nation, people everywhere are arguing about statues. The statue in question was of a World War II Soviet general, also attributed with helping build the Berlin Wall and suppressing a Hungarian uprising during the Cold War era. The government in the city of Prague took down the statue to be placed in a museum. Many in Prague view the statue as a symbol of Soviet communist-era repression of the population. The implications. Statues are art. Art is an interpretation of something by the artist, and everyone has different interpretations of one thing or another. Some people like Picasso and Michelangelo, others do not. What people do with their art is up to them. Why is Russia telling another sovereign and independent country, recognized by the international community as a legitimate state in the world today, what to do with their art? Didn't they do that enough during the Cold War? Moving on. Next up, New York Times World Section. OPEC and Russia agree to cut oil production. As the price of gas at the pump has been decreasing due to the reduced demand of overall oil, the OPEC Plus group have come to an agreement to cut oil production globally by 10% by June of this year, and hopefully by another 5% soon thereafter. Then the supply would be slowly increased until returning to previous levels by April of 2022. The implications. Why is there so much fuss in OPEC Plus countries over the price of oil today? I'll give you 5 seconds to think of your answer. And in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and if you said money, no. Or rather, only partially. Dollar bills is the simplistic answer for those that only look at the face value of corporate international markets. We here at Lo-Fi Poli-Sci understand something increasingly important about OPEC and OPEC Plus countries. Take a quick glance at the list of member countries. Do a comparative analysis with Freedom House scores and regime type. Then cross-reference that list with OPEC member countries that the oil industry is nationalized, meaning it is not owned by private corporations, but rather owned by the government. What you realize is that OPEC and OPEC Plus countries are authoritarian regimes that generally all own the rights and revenue of the oil industry. The additional implications. The reduction of the price of oil for OPEC countries is about maintaining power in authoritarian regimes. Money is only one means of doing so, but keeping the authoritarian government up and running and further suppressing any opposition in the country that could potentially lead to a regime change, that's the real protection behind the curtains of the Broadway play called Oil and Power in Authoritarian Countries Across the Globe. Today, it's Freedom House Friday. Remember from our description from last week, Freedom House scores countries across the globe on a scale of 0 to 100, based on the level of civil liberties and civil rights, meaning how free the citizens of the country are. 0 is completely authoritarian, while 100 is completely free. They also provide 3 overarching categories of free, partially free, and not free. Today we're continuing on our journey southward and focusing on Guatemala. Let's see how this country holds up to Freedom House's scrutiny. And Guatemala's score for 2019 comes in at 53 out of 100, giving them a partly free ranking, having decreased 3 points from 56 out of 100 in 2018. Here at Lo-Fi, we always give you the previous year's stats, because stats from this year, 2020, are still changing and therefore unreliable as far as data goes. And also remember, Lo-Fi Poli-Sci students, this is not a ranking of placement between countries, but rather a score from 0 to 100. The implications. To quote Freedom House, while Guatemala holds regular elections that are generally free, organized crime and corruption severely impact the functioning of government. Violence and criminal extortion schemes are serious problems, and victims have little recourse to justice. In 2018, the Attorney General of the country, along with the United Nations-backed International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, made a plea to take away the current president's immunity for corruption charges, after gathering evidence that the president took illegal campaign contributions during the election campaign. However, the legislature in the country refuses to act on this evidence. A question to Lo-Fi students. What can ordinary people do in a country to fight corruption when the institutions that are supposed to protect against corruption are themselves corrupt? Write in and let me know your thoughts. And now for our headline in the Spotlight segment. Source, Reuters World Section. Lebanon seizes 25 tons of hashish to be smuggled into Africa. Authorities state that this is the largest drug bust in the country's history. Security forces did not disclose which African state the shipment was headed toward, but stated that the hash was hidden in 8 different trucks that authorities stopped based on a tip. The background and implications of this story. Yesterday was Iranian spies in Budapest. Today, African drug smugglers in Beirut. The underworld of crime and espionage continues across the globe. We here at Lo-Fi Poli-Sci make it our prime directive to keep you informed, in touch, and aware that regardless of what you see and read on about the world, the earth is still spinning as it always is. If you focus too much on one thing, you'll miss the simple fact that life is continuing on as it always does. A side note, if you're unsure what hashish or hash is, sorry, this isn't a show about drugs, though we don't shy away from reporting on them. And a last piece of news from the Washington Post section, Innovations. Walmart teams with Neuro's robot cars to deliver groceries in Houston. The previously named corporations have announced that they will have autonomous vehicles start delivering groceries later this year. Now, if you're wondering what is an autonomous vehicle, that we can tell you. It's a driverless car. This is not a new concept, as many companies have been working on driverless cars for some time, and many cars today can park themselves. The implications. Does this bring us one step closer to the Jetsons cars and cartoons with driverless flying cars? Is this something we want? Do people like cars because they like to drive? Or because they are sometimes quicker to use to get from here to there? Or do people like them because they can sightsee out of the window? The short answers. Not really. Some people. Yes, yes, and yes. I would sit and vibe in a driverless ride if it brought us closer to that lunar lo-fi, but that's a conversation still for another time. And that's a brief snapshot of what's going on in the world today. Please write in with your questions, comments, or requests of countries for our news segments to lofipoli@planetmail.com. That's Lofi, L-O-F-I, poly, P-O-L-I, sci, S-C-I, @planetmail.com. Let me say thank you so much for listening. Stay safe, wash those hands, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Lo-Fi Poli-Sci podcast. Pickering, signing off.